Welcome into Week 6 Thursday Night Football as we're going to see the Broncos taking on the Chiefs. There's a couple of interesting plays here. Don't just look at the Broncos and be like, well, there's not a lot of fantasy output there. Could be true, but there's actually a couple diamonds in the rough, I would probably want to say. Let's get into it. Let's take a look at the fantasy players to watch in this game. First, on the Broncos side, the top fantasy players in my opinion are quarterback Russell Wilson, running back Jaleel McLaughlin, wide receiver Courtland Sutton, and wide receiver Jerry Jeudy. For starters, let's talk about Russell Wilson. Wilson's going up against a Chiefs defense giving up the 13th fewest passing yards and ranked 10th for fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. Wilson has he's just looked absolutely washed this season. I'm not sure if he just doesn't have it anymore, but ever since coming off over here from the Seahawks organization, he was just been straight trash. He will look to get things going this week against a Chiefs defense that has been kind of tough on opposing quarterbacks, but if you think that he's going to keep up with Mahomes, you're just really sadly mistaken. But at this point, we're just hoping for a decent fantasy output, which is doable with Russell Wilson. Now let's move on to Jaleel McLaughlin. McLaughlin's going against a defense giving up the 11th fewest yards and ranked 7th for fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. Assuming Javonte Williams is not playing this week, McLaughlin has a chance to really establish himself in the NFL. He did great in the preseason. He did great when Javonte got injured in week 2. Or at least 2 weeks ago, he did great last week as the main ball carrier. If he's able to go up against this Chiefs and lay out a solid performance, the question must be had for McLaughlin to be a solid contributor for this team moving forward. If Williams does play, which it does seem like he will play considering he was a full practice participant as of Tuesday, I still see McLaughlin as a start this week, and I would actually start Jaleel McLaughlin over Javonte Williams this week. Next, we're going to talk about is Courtland Sutton. Sutton going against a defense ranked 10th for fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. Courtland Sutton was absolutely awful last week, doing it just being locked up by Sauce Gardner. This week, he looks to get back on track and be a productive wide receiver. Sutton is my favorite wide receiver this week on this team. Just get him in your lineups. Lastly, let's talk about Jerry Jeudy. Now, Jeudy did have a decent week last week, but at the end of the day, he is capped by the lack of offense that's being produced. Jerry Jeudy is too talented to bench, so unfortunately, you're going to have to play him. The problem is that you can't be excited to have him on your roster right now. At this point, you just have to play him and move on. Hopefully, it's normally between Jerry Jeudy and Courtland Sutton who's going to have the better game. I think this game, though, it will be Courtland Sutton. Now let's switch gears, move over to the Chiefs. The top fantasy players for this team, in my opinion, are quarterback Patrick Mahomes, running back Isaiah Pacheco, wide receiver Rashee Rice, and tight end Travis Kelce. First, we're going to talk about Patrick Mahomes. Mahomes is going up against a defense giving up the 4th most passing yards and ranked dead last for fantasy points allowed to opposing quarterbacks. Mahomes is always just a set it and forget it type of player, but going against a Broncos defense who allow anyone and their grandma to score fantasy points against them, Mahomes is an absolute smash play this week along other Chiefs players. Now let's talk about Isaiah Pacheco. Now Pacheco is going up against a defense giving up the most rushing yards and ranked dead last for fantasy points allowed to opposing running backs. Pacheco has to be one of the hardest running players I have ever seen. This dude gives me shades of Marshawn Lynch sometimes. He runs with intent and purpose. I absolutely love watching this guy play. Now he gets onto playing a defense who will hand him 100 yards rushing on a silver platter. Yes, please give me all the Pacheco this week. Next is Rashee Rice. Now, Rice is going up against a defense ranked 20th for fantasy points allowed to opposing wide receivers. He has been the most consistent of all the wide receivers on this team. Tony got some decent targets last week, but just isn't consistent enough for me to recommend that guy to you. So, Rice, however, is someone I want to recommend as a good fantasy target this week. Rice should be on everyone's roster. Last but not least, for the fantasy players I'm watching this week on Thursday Night Football is Travis Kelce. Now, Kelce's going up against a defense ranked 28th for fantasy points allowed to opposing tight ends. There is nothing you can say to me to make me think that the main reason Kelce was able to suck it up with his injury last week and come back into the game and score that touchdown was because he didn't want to disappoint Taylor Swift. This guy is the creme de la creme when it comes to the tight end position, and he should be licking his chops this week as he goes against a Broncos defense. Enjoy this week if you're a Kelce owner. Just like there's players that I would target for fantasy in this game, there's also a couple sleepers that you could kind of target if you're in need of a flex spot, maybe because of an injury or for a bye week. For the Broncos, I can see Marvin Mims Jr. as fantasy viable only in terms as a flex play if you're desperate. In the right situation, he could have some type of flex appeal. Even though that this offense really doesn't produce a ton of fantasy output, if you need a dart throw due to bye weeks or that injury, it wouldn't hurt to just give Mims a shot. Now for the Chiefs, I can see Kadarius Toney, Sky Moore, and MVS having a shot at some type of fantasy relevance if you're in that pinch. There are just so many mouths to feed on this offense that most receivers get between 2 to 3 targets just per game, which won't really get it done for fantasy football on just a consistent type of basis. Toney received 6 targets last week, but this week it could be Sky Moore or MVS with those 6 targets. Just way too inconsistent to recommend any of these guys to you guys, but again, just some dart throws you might be able to just throw it out there and see what sticks to the wall. At the end of the day, anyone can go off and become a fantasy asset, but it's ultimately up to you to make the final decision on who you put into your lineups. Guys, hit the subscribe button. We're putting out videos almost each and every day, going over something to help you improve in fantasy football. We want to make sure that you're making the best decisions possible. That way you can ultimately hold up that trophy. Like I said, hit the subscribe button. I'd really appreciate it. We're moving right along to 700 subscribers. Can't wait to see you guys on the next video. We'll see you guys next time.